following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Welcome. This is The Art of Politics. My name is Bill O'Brien. I'm here with my good friend and fellow state representative, Ken Gidge.
How you doing?
How are you?
And of course, I am the good Democrat, and you are the
Good Republican.
good Republican.
Yes. It was starting off pretty nice today.
Yes, so far.
Yes.
I mean, we just last week we had quite a row with Jennifer Horn. I shouldn't say that. She was.
I think the show went really well, and as with a lot of those shows, and I think most of your folks, the viewers here, understand that the time just goes so quickly. There was just so much to talk about, and but I think she made a pretty good presentation, and we had our usual friction. I was trying to deal with facts, and you were trying to do some other stuff.
And I was supposed to do real facts.
And but it went well, and I was really pleased that she came on, and I'd love to have her back at some point.
A child of 10 in her family.
Yes.
She has 5 children. One such child, 4 children of her own. She works for the Salvation Army.
Yeah, and she's run for Congress. And was
right.
Nominated. I think you pointed out that she was one of the first.
The very first woman
who was nominated for Congress by the Republicans. So a real great background, and she's doing a great job as chairman of our party.
Well, I don't want to go that far because I'm a Democrat, although Buckley is. That's not good.
Being a party chair is a difficult job because you're supposed to be confrontational, and I won't say it was Jennifer, but somebody else came to me once and said, I'm thinking of running for party chair. What do you think? And I said, well, you're kind of an ambitious person. They go, yeah, and you're ambitious for office someday, aren't you? I said, yeah. And I said, well, you shouldn't run for party chair because if you do, and if you're a successful party chair, at the end of the day, at the end of your term, when you're thinking, okay, now I'm going to run for political office, the Republicans will love you, the Democrats will hate you, and the independents will be disgusted with you. Because your job is to get out there and be confrontational and to show the inconsistencies and constantly be doing that. And it's a valuable task. It's a valuable task that Ray Buckley performs, just as it's a valuable task that Jennifer Horn performs, keeping each other and the 2 opposing parties honest and pointing out where they're going wrong. But
it's interesting that you say that because we were definitely 2 degrees different. A Republican, a real Republican, and well, a Democrat over here, and we do fight it out.
Quasi-Democrat.
Yeah,
we're working on you, my friend.
Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. But I think as she brought up a couple good points, and then I'd like to go into some national stuff that's taking place about how good New Hampshire is doing because of who we are, the 400, not paid much money, and.
Yeah, and we've often talked amongst ourselves and on this program about the citizen legislature, the legislature that pays a nominal amount of $100 a year, and the type of people you attract, the turnover, all of which is good. There's a downside, and the downside is that those folks who are in the middle of their careers or younger and have
That's
family
right.
responsibilities or don't have the type of job that allows you to go up there half a year for 2 or 3 days a week, can't participate. And that's a problem. And, many times when I was speaker and when I was going to become speaker, I talked to people about that. We can do certain things for folks. I would, for example, put people who had more time constraints with their employment on committees with less of a time commitment. But it's a problem. It really is. Solving that problem, though, by paying a salary sufficient to live on it promotes, what I call careerism, career politicians.
Well, I think,
And for better or worse, that can be a
yeah,
problem.
no,
Better is, let me just finish. The better is that we get people who are dedicated to it and expert about it. The problem is that we have people who will do what is necessary to keep their job rather than what is necessary for New Hampshire.
I agree with you, and I really don't think that New Hampshire should pay their representatives a living wage. But I think that we should pay the representatives so they don't take as much money out of their own pocket to be representatives, because it's very expensive to do it. I mean, right, we get $100, and as you said before, I mean, we're happy to do it. I mean, we want to do it. But it takes a lot of money out of your pocket. It costs you money to do this.
Sure. I mean, in so many different ways that aren't reimbursed. I can remember when I was speaker, there was a member who showed up and, was wearing some really informal clothes, dungarees
yes.
and flannel shirt and so forth. And I, on the other side of the aisle, I was a Democrat, so I went to one of the more senior members of your caucus and said, could someone talk to this fellow and say, out of respect for our colleagues, out of respect for the constituents of the state, we try to address a little bit better than that, suits, ties, jackets, that sort of thing. Just again, so we're showing respect. And he said, there might be an economic issue there.
Yeah.
You feel bad about that.
Yeah.
In that case, he said he'd take care of it, and he did. But the offer was, and maybe it shouldn't come to this, but the offer was, well, if there's a problem, tell us, and we'll, without mentioning names, go around and each put $10 into a kitty and give it to the fellow to buy a suit.
It wouldn't make any difference if a Democrat or a Republican. The Democrat and Republican would contribute if somebody had a problem. And it's interesting that you would say that. I won't say who, but there was a lady who had that problem this year.
Yeah.
Who very close to in my workings.
Right.
And she was talking to, and she talked to him and said, look, and she needed some assistance, and she was assisted. So it's kind of neat that we work this way.
Right.
But I think a little bit more money, not much, but enough to take care of our clothes and maybe get a sandwich or something like that.
No, there is this problem, and you're eating away from home, and you have to be out and about in the evenings. And
you can do it from the mornings, from breakfasts to the afternoons, lunches, to cocktails in the afternoon, and then dinners.
But the good thing there, Ken, may well be that it means that there will be a turnover there. That's one of the things that promotes the turnover.
You said this before, that's a good point.
Yeah, and a third of the folks, whether you're having the legislature go from one party control to another party control, it always has been about a third turnover.
Yeah, that's our term limits.
Yeah, it's just the practical term limits. As I've said before, I think I said it last week, was that I'd go out and about and I'd talk to other speakers, and there's a couple of things that always come up, and I'm sorry to reveal secrets.
I remember, yeah.
But one thing is how much you get paid.
Yeah.
The other thing is what are your term limits? And I think we, in many cases, surprise them with our New Hampshire answers on both of these. We get paid $100 a year, and no, there's no term limits. We just get out ourselves, because. It's a real sacrifice to be there, a financial sacrifice, very, very much an honor.
And the story about someone going to California and they asked him how much you made. Tell that story.
Well, it was a good friend of mine, a fellow who was a retired dentist from up in North Country, was going out to visit his daughter, and his daughter was taking him around in California, and they went to the State House. It's a beautiful state house, by the way. I don't know if you've ever been in Sacramento, but they have a glorious state house. And he was doing the tour, came across the guard, and gave him his state representative business card.
Sure.
And so, in some states, being a state representative is something big, significant. So they, in no time at all, were ushering him around. They brought him to the speaker's office, and the speaker brought him in and talking about New Hampshire and California politics and all. And eventually the speaker asked him, how much you get paid? And he said, well, I get $100. Yeah, 100. And the speaker goes, you know, you're a small state, and 100,000 is just not bad. You know, here in California, we get 110,000 a year, but we have, you know, big districts and everything. He goes, no, Mr. Speaker, it is $100 a year, not $100,000 a year. And you know, the speaker was incredulous, and I found that same reaction myself. You have kind of people, speakers from other states, who sort of cock their head and look at you sideways when you say, you know, I get paid $125 a year as speaker, and they say, well, why would you do it? Well, you do it for your neighbors. You do it for you do it for the same reason that you get on a school board and you don't get paid for it substantially, or you know, the selectmen and aldermen and councilmen in our towns and cities spend so much time. It's for free.
You know, and I hope I know we've talked about this before, and I hope the people aren't getting bored with us talking about this, but one good aspect of being out there and voting is that when you vote for someone and they take their time, make sure you know who you're voting for, obviously, but understand, you know, they're really pretty hardworking.
Yeah, it's remarkable. I mean, and one of the better experiences I've had in my life is being a member of the New Hampshire legislature, because whether Republican or Democrat, you meet people of extraordinary dedication, extraordinary ability. And you and I have talked about this. You know, if you can at times get past the R and the D and say, who are you as a person, you come across people with extraordinary backgrounds, you know, both in government service,
surprisingly,
and in business, in the arts, in the literature,
doctors,
and So and you meet people who are, it just naturally attracts people of, for the most part, not entirely. You know, we have the same. You know, if you put together 400 people, you're going to have people who get in trouble each term. But for the most part, you have a remarkable cross section of the community and people of character.
And you know what surprises me is we were just telling the story about, you know, saying 100, and, you know, the speaker says, well, you're a small state, we get 110 here. For this individual not to know about New Hampshire and how it works, you would think that they would learn a little bit about their country. I know they're in California, and California by itself is a country. I mean, let's face it. Yeah. But surprisingly, in the smaller ways, I've talked to people and they don't believe it.
You know,
they don't believe I'm a real state representative.
Right, right. You know, though, it doesn't surprise me. What does California have? 35 million people. We have 1.3 million here. You know, you ever seen those pictures of a person in Boston looking to California, and you'll see a map, you know, have, you know, a big Boston area, and then a little bit large area of Massachusetts, and then there's a big New York City, and then there's just like this blank area in San Francisco out there. Well, probably the reverse is they kind of look to the east and they think what's out there, and I don't think New Hampshire comes up in their vision all that much, except once every 4 years when we have the presidential primary here.
Yeah, New Hampshire's pretty important. But a lot of things have been happening on a national level. I mean, my God, I mean, this has just been such a bizarre, I mean, we haven't even talked about probably the latest, and I know a lot of people are interested in probably what you think and I feel about the Zimmerman trial. Where is your thinking about that? I mean, this is Florida.
I believe that there are national figures that have chosen to take an unfortunate and an unhappy incident and blow it up into something that it shouldn't represent. It shouldn't represent anything having to do with race. This incident had nothing to do with race, except when people start talking about it as a racial incident. And I think they do it in part because there is a racial grievance industry out there, and I think they do it in part, politicians such as Eric Holder and Barack Obama do it because it's a way of distracting us from more important issues.
Oh, come on, I mean...
No, that's...
No, well, first of all, I I happen to agree with you on most of what you said, except for Barack Obama. I mean, he's in an interesting position. He has to do something, because of one being black and one being.
We, as Speaker of the House, as Governor of New Hampshire, as President of the United States, as Attorney General of the United States, there's one thing that you immediately realize, which is you don't talk about pending criminal cases because you don't want to influence a jury.
Well, the president didn't.
He did.
No, he didn't. The case was over.
No,
he spoke
a year ago. Don't you recall that he said, if I had a son, he would look like Trayvon Martin?
No, I don't think that was a year ago. You could, be.
Yeah, that was, then he said, if you remember the news conference he gave a few weeks back, he said, what I meant by that was, that's how I looked 35 years ago. Well, you want to know it? And if 35 years ago, you were walking around with the makings of an intoxicating beverage called lean, you had 2 out of 3 ingredients, Skittles and watermelon drink, and all you needed was a Robitussin. And if you had marijuana in your system, and if you'd been suspended from school a number of times, and you were
for fighting,
when an adult, when you were 17, almost 18, a week or 2 away from being 18, if an adult confronted you and you immediately hit him in the head, well, then you probably would be like Trayvon Martin. But for the most part, we don't encourage that kind of behavior. Look, it is unfortunate, the problems that we have with young black men in our country. It must be terrible if you're an honest young black man to have to put up with the evidence
being
of
followed in stores,
yeah,
not getting taxi cabs.
And so why does that happen? Why does that happen?
Well, statistically, I've one for you. 600 times more black men commit crimes than white, but whites commit 4 times more crimes than Orientals. Isn't that a statistic?
So the African American population is about 12 to 13% of the country. Over 50% of the crimes are committed by African Americans. It's not African American women; it's African American men. So you take that 13% and you cut it in half, say about 6%.
Yeah,
and then let me follow me on this. And then you say it's not real young kids, it's not older fellows who are committing these crimes. It's people between the age of 17 and 29. That's about 1% of the population. So we have 1% of the population, young black men, who are committing around 40 to 50% of all the crimes. What is unfortunate is that there's an understandable reaction to that. It's just as Jesse Jackson was quoted in saying, when he's walking down the street late at night in Chicago and he hears footsteps behind him and he's by himself, and this is what he said, look it up, I look over my shoulder and I feel better if it's a white young man.
But he was making a point, and
that's unfortunate.
It's a good point. But
it's unfortunate.
But we're up here in New Hampshire, and let's face it, we're white. If we see a black person, 2 black people a week sometimes,
sure,
it's very unusual. Other parts of the country, it obviously is different. But you lived in Boston for a while. I lived in Boston for a while. I have been in what one would call the ghetto, the really low income. It's another world. I mean, that doesn't make it better. There's no excuse for people committing crimes. But let's face it, one family member, the drugs, if you add all of this in there. So I can't say, hey, black, period. I can say circumstances also. But that doesn't make any difference now.
Do you know, you should read books of an author by the name of Thomas Sowell. He's an economist, an African-American, teaches at Stanford University. He wrote a book, I think it's about 5 or 10 years ago, and he's made this point in other of his writings, is that at the turn of the last century, so that when it became 1900, there were more African-American adults married as a percentage of the population than whites. African-American employment of adults was as a percentage of their population higher than whites. What has happened is that government policies have disabled the African American community.
Are we going back to politics as
Yeah.
a Republican, Democrat?
What we're going back to is an understanding that well-intentioned policies can produce, in the long run, really bad results. Now, we can see it in the African American community. 1960, around, I think it was 20%, a little under 20% of African American births were outside of marriage. Now it's up to 73%. Almost 3 out of every 4 black children are born without to people.
And your point being made?
The point being made that that's a disaster.
It's a disaster without both a father and a mother.
Yes, and
Yes.
the reason that has happened is because government policies have enabled it to happen.
Give me an idea what you mean.
Well, for example, we had for years aid for dependent children, which you can't get if there is a male living, an adult male living in your household. And so
I happen to agree with you on that
and so there's been a number of
Yeah, yeah.
policies that have promoted
But
irresponsibility.
that was as much Republicans as Democrats. You're not calling it the one party.
I'm calling it an activist government that was put in place for the best of reasons, because we want to help out people who are challenged. Or if you have a little 17-year-old girl that gets pregnant and the family isn't taking care of her and her child, you want to take care of them. But you end up producing, if you're not careful, more heartache than and more anguish than you're solving. That's the concern. In many ways, that's the difference between Democrats and Republicans.
There's no. You're acting as if Democrats are not smart and without compassion.
No. We had a discussion several shows back. I think when we had Rip Holden here. And the discussion is, should we legislate based upon emotion? And it was a discussion whether or not we reimburse some of the FRM investors. And what I was trying to move us to in that is saying, we've got to be careful what the long-term consequences of legislating is, of making a choice. Because if we legislate out of emotion, then we might be causing a greater problem than we're solving. We can solve maybe the instant situation, but we're going to, without understanding what we're doing.
Without getting into too much of that, I was right in the middle of all of that. So but just put the buttons in a minute. Let's get back to that.
Into like the war on poverty. The war on poverty was well-intentioned. Right? Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty. I understand it. Robert Kennedy toured Appalachia, saw children suffering from malnutrition. In the inner city, there were children who weren't being well fed. And certainly, we have to give relief for those situations. But we have to be very careful that we don't fund a lifestyle that is dependent for generation after generation on receiving government benefits.
Those days are, if those days aren't done, they're almost done.
No, they aren't. No,
come on.
You want to know what's...
it's just, you can't live on the money that you're given by the government. You can't live on $30 a week food stamps. I mean, people have gone out who don't need the food stamps, but use $30 to...
Food stamps is one of 12 federal food assistance programs. It's not the only one. There's been a study that shows nationally, in New Hampshire, if you are able, as a family of 4, to get all of the available welfare programs, you sign up, you're on them, your family has to earn $64,000 a year, pay taxes on the $64,000 a year. You have to earn at least that amount before you can buy on your own the value of all the services you're getting in goods. So it's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle.
Hold on. Yes, but...
you get free phones.
No.
You get free cars. You get free housing.
You don't get free cars.
You do.
You don't. They don't know.
Yes, they do.
There's no program where they come up and give you a free car.
Yeah, Ken, there is. There is. All you have to do is say, I'm going to go out and look for a job. And you get transportation.
Well, that's not a free car. That's transportation. You don't get a free car.
Well, if that transportation has 4 wheels, brakes, and steering wheel, and you put gas into it, it might be a car.
I have a great idea. Well, let's get over because of the Zimmerman thing, because I think there's a point I think we'll both agree upon. It doesn't make any difference if it's black, white, that's gotta completely stop, and I agree with you. But
You know what should stop is the violence in the African American community, because 90%, I think it's actually 93% of young black men who die in murder, and a lot of them do, it's sad, die at the hands of another black man. The violence in the African American community is directed inward, and it's not. What is so unusual, even if this was a racial incident, the Zimmerman case, what is so unusual?
Think it was.
I don't think it was. But what's so unusual is it involved the New York Times invented this term that no one had ever heard before: white Hispanic. You had a light-skinned man killing an African American. And the circumstances were ambiguous, and the jury found apparently sufficient evidence of self-defense that they didn't want to convict. That's almost, because it's so unusual, a man bites dog story. It's unusual when we report it, but it's not. What is more usual is, for example, the 50 young people who died in Chicago during the time the Zimmerman case was going on, died by reason of murder in Chicago, while the Zimmerman case was going on.
That's really, Chicago is a whole thing, and we could talk about Detroit and what's happening there. But just to finish the Zimmerman thing, I think what people have to understand, there's a law. There was a law that, in a sense, let him carry a gun, and if you felt like you were being hurt or you felt like you're in danger, you could shoot and kill somebody. That's a law. We have a law up here, stand your ground.
No, you haven't described it correctly. It's
okay,
not that you
we have about 2 minutes.
It's not like you can feel that you can be hurt. You can use deadly force to defend your life or yourself from serious bodily harm. Now, that's the stand your ground law. Even before there were stand your ground laws, and there are in about 30-something states, there's always been recognized in American jurisprudence that you have a right to defend yourself. Zimmerman was on his back. He wasn't standing his ground at all. He wasn't going anywhere. He was getting his, what's that term?
No, that's what I meant. That's what I meant.
And
is
so
that you literally, legally, you can do that.
And so that's what's so disappointing about this whole episode. And that's why I say that there's an effort to distract us from the problems of this country. The president gets up and talks about the stand your ground laws. This had nothing to do with the stand your ground laws. Eric Holder and the president and Al Sharpton get up and talk about race. This had nothing to do with race. This man, Zimmerman, grew up with 2 step sisters who are African American. This man, Zimmerman, his political involvement was to make sure an African American homeless man who was beaten up by the son of a cop got justice, and he did it himself. On his own money, he made up flyers and made sure that the community was aware of this. This man was not a racist. And to deal with this as a racial incident is a disservice for all of us.
Well, it's another quick half hour. We never get anywhere. Now, what we're doing for the summers, we're doing half-hour shows. Come fall, maybe we'll get back to an hour show. Hopefully. I know you're running for, why don't you say it?
Yeah, I am running for Congress, and if I can give my website.
You please do.
The website is O'Brien for Congress. I have an email address, and conveniently enough, it's o'brienforcongress@gmail.com. Send me an email, get on the website, and in addition, if you need to talk with me, you can call me on my phone at 603-620-8710. Thanks.
And we have agreed that since I am a Democrat, my candidate is Annie Custer, and I shall be working with her or voting for her. That has nothing to do with my partner here, but we thought this would be the fair way. My name is Ken Gidge, and you can get me at Gidge World, which is an art website. Also, Facebook. Are you on Facebook by now?
I am. So just my name, and you'll see my happy picture there. Yeah. You know you're at the right site.
Befriend us. Also, you can get me at kgidge@aol.com or telephone number 603-864-9332. Bill, again, thank you.
Yeah, great discussion.
Thank you. See you next time.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.